the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
All right. You know how sometimes you see a headline and you just think, wow, I need to know more about this.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're doing today, diving into a story that's kind of tense and raises some interesting questions about security.
For sure.
Especially in the nation's capital. So picture this. Early morning, March 9th, 2025, near the White House.
Right.
A place we all imagine as like super secure.
Right.
Secret Service agents end up shooting a man in what's being called an armed confrontation. We've got a report from townhall.com. So there's a lot we don't know yet, but let's see what we can uncover together, what it might mean.
Absolutely.
So first, let's set the scene, really understand what went down.
Okay.
So this individual, he was traveling from Indiana, and get this, he'd already been flagged as a potential concern by local police.
Oh, that's interesting. So there was some prior information about him before he even got to D.C.
Exactly. And that makes you think, right? How does that information get shared and what actions are taken based on that, especially when it crosses state lines?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And another thing, the actual encounter with the Secret Service, it didn't even happen at the White House itself.
Oh, really?
It was near the Eisenhower Executive Office building.
Huh. That's interesting. That building houses some pretty important offices. I mean, the vice president's office is there and the National Security Council.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about the White House, we're talking about the heart of U.S. government.
Right. Exactly. So this incident, it has even more weight knowing what's in that building.
Definitely. It really highlights the high stakes. So this is where things escalate.
Okay.
According to the report, the man brandishes a firearm, and that leads to the shooting.
Right, but the report doesn't really say what happened before that.
Yeah.
What specifically led up to that moment?
Yeah, we don't know yet. Were there attempts to de-escalate the situation? What exactly did he do that made the agents fire? We're kind of missing those key details.
Yeah, hopefully the investigation will clear that up.
I know, right?
It
really makes you think about the pressure those agents are under in these situations. Split-second decisions.
Yeah.
Life or death.
Absolutely. And the use of lethal force, it's not something taken lightly by agencies like the Secret Service. I mean, they go through intense training to assess threats,
Right.
De-escalation techniques, firearm proficiency. If they felt like there was a real and immediate threat, their training would kick in.
And to add another layer to this, the Metropolitan Police Department, they're going to be investigating the incident.
Okay, so an outside agency.
Yeah, which could bring a fresh perspective, another set of eyes.
Right. It'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that investigation.
Yeah. What does it tell us about the security protocols in place and what led up to the shooting?
Definitely.
Now, before we get too far into the weeds, I think it's worth mentioning something about our source.
Okay.
So we're working with a report from townhall.com.
Right.
And it's known to have a certain political leaning, and that's always something to consider, right, when you're trying to make sense of any news story.
Absolutely. Every source has their own way of looking at things. I don't think it's necessarily about, obvious bias.
Right.
But it's about understanding, the lens they're using.
A filter.
Yeah. So knowing that helps you think about things more critically.
Exactly. All right, so let's go back to security for a second.
Okay.
We've all seen pictures of the White House, right? It's fences, it's guards, it's like this fortress.
Yeah.
But this incident, with someone flagged as a potential concern, getting close to a building like the Eisenhower Executive Office building, it makes you think.
It does make you wonder. I wouldn't say it throws out all the security measures they have.
Right.
But it shows threats are always changing.
Yeah.
And since they knew about this guy ahead of time, it might be that they messed up somewhere before he got there. Not that the security at the building wasn't enough. It raises questions about, how information is shared between agencies and what they do when someone is flagged, especially when they're moving around.
That's a good point. So it's not just about having layers of security at the place itself.
Right.
It's also about stopping someone before they even get there.
Exactly. You need both, figuring out threats ahead of time and having security measures in place.
Right. And it also raises a bigger question.
Okay.
About, security versus freedom of movement.
Right.
Especially in D.C., where you have so many important places, but they're also public.
For sure, sure. Security agencies always have to figure out how to keep things safe without making it feel like a lockdown. This whole thing might make them rethink things, you know?
Right.
How to increase security without making it too hard for people to visit these places. It's a tough balance.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about this potential concern element.
Okay.
We don't know the specifics about this guy's mental state, and it's important not to speculate.
Yeah.
But it does bring up some bigger questions about, as a society, how we deal with mental health crises.
Absolutely.
Especially when someone is away from their usual support network.
Yeah, this incident really shows how complicated and often hidden mental health issues can be.
For sure. So it makes you ask, what kind of support systems could we have in place, especially for people who are traveling and might be going through something difficult, far from the resources they normally rely on?
That's a huge question. We do have things like national hotlines. Right. And resources.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure people know about them? How can they actually use them when they need them?
Yeah.
Like maybe we need more public awareness campaigns, information at airports and train stations, maybe even in travel apps.
That's a good idea. It's about reaching people where they are, giving them information when that might be most vulnerable.
Exactly. And another thing is maybe law enforcement and mental health professionals could work together better.
Oh, interesting.
Some places have mobile crisis teams that can respond to mental health emergencies. They can help calm things down and offer support right there.
Yeah.
And that could be really helpful for someone who's traveling and having a hard time, away from their usual support.
So it's about understanding that sometimes you need more than just the police.
Right. There are times when having a mental health professional there could help de-escalate things and get the person connected with the right resources.
Yeah, it's about having a more well-rounded approach to these kinds of situations.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's circle back for a sec. You were talking about how this whole thing might show a breakdown in stopping something before it happens.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. We know this guy was already flagged as a concern back in Indiana. So the question is, did that info get to the right people? Like the Secret Service.
So even if the White House has, real good security, the problem could be with how they gather information and share it.
Right. It's easy to focus on the fences and guards and stuff, but good security starts way before someone even gets to a place.
Right.
It's about analyzing intel, figuring out threats, and agencies talking to each other.
If one part of the system is weak, the whole thing could fall apart.
Exactly. And then there's the question of, okay, someone's flagged. What happens next? Did they try to keep tabs on this guy as he traveled to D.C.? Did anyone talk to, assess him before this all went down? Maybe the investigation will give us some answers.
And how do they even decide someone is a potential concern in the first place? What makes them put that label on someone?
That's a tough one. It's all about balancing individual freedom with keeping everyone safe. Law enforcement has to make judgment calls with the info they have. And we don't know the specifics of why this guy was flagged back in Indiana.
It's a good reminder that security is way more complicated than just walls and guards, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's about information, analysis, being proactive. It's not just reacting to something that already happened. And, this incident could make them rethink things, not just for the White House, but for other important places and events, too.
Makes sense. We've talked about the security side of things, but let's dive a bit more into the mental health aspect. You mentioned needing better support, especially for people traveling. What would that look like?
One thing is just making people more aware of the resources that are already out there. Not everyone knows about the suicide hotline or how to get help if they're having a tough time while they're away from home.
Right.
We could have more campaigns, info at airports and stuff, even on travel apps.
I like that, meeting people where they're at.
Exactly. And maybe law enforcement and mental health professionals could work together better.
Oh, how so?
Well, some places have these mobile crisis teams. They can go right to where a mental health emergency is happening, de-escalate things, offer support right there on the spot. That could be huge for someone traveling who's having a hard time away from their usual support system.
So it's not always about just sending in the police.
Right. Sometimes having a mental health expert there could make a big difference. It's about taking a more, I guess you could say, holistic approach.
And thinking about this incident, this guy was flagged as a concern. What happens after that? Do they follow up, try to get him help?
That's the key, right? Flagging someone should be the first step, not the last. There needs to be a system to figure out what they need, offer support, and connect them with the right resources, whether that's therapy, medication, or help in a crisis.
So it's not enough to just identify the problem. You got to actually do something about it.
Exactly. And that means different groups need to work together. Law enforcement, mental health providers, social services. It's about building a safety net so people don't fall through the cracks.
And maybe this awful situation can lead to making those systems better so people who are struggling can get the help they need.
I hope so. It shows that security isn't just about protecting people from physical harm, but also about taking care of their mental well-being. It's about building a society where we feel safe and cared for.
Well said. We've talked about the security around the White House, the things this incident revealed about how that could be better, and how important it is to have better ways to support mental health. But we're not done yet. We'll be back after a quick break to wrap up our conversation and look at the bigger picture of all this. Stay tuned. Well, we've really gone deep on this one, looking at this incident near the White House from all sides. And it's clear that this brings up some really big, complex issues. It's not just about this one event.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here, security protocols, intelligence sharing, the use of force, and of course, the whole mental health piece.
And for you listening, it might make you think twice about what security really means, especially in a place like D.C. It's easy to assume that those big landmarks are, totally protected. But this shows that even the most secure places have weaknesses.
It really highlights that security is never finished. It's always evolving, You got to keep up with the threats. And it's not just walls and guards. It's intel. It's knowing what's coming. It's agencies talking to each other. That's huge.
This whole thing also shows how we need to think differently about mental health. It's not enough to just say, oh, this person's a potential concern. We got to have ways to figure out what they need, get them help, and support them.
And that means a change in how we do things. We need to be more proactive, not just react after something happens. It's about building a society where people feel safe asking for help, where they know they'll be treated with kindness and understanding.
And, it's easy to forget that there are real people at the heart of this story. The Secret Service agents had to make incredibly tough decisions that could change lives forever. And the man involved, whatever he was going through, was clearly struggling.
It's a good reminder that these aren't just headlines. These are real people whose lives are forever changed by these events. We need to remember that, to understand how complicated these situations are, and to push for a system that's both safe and compassionate.
Absolutely. Behind every headline, there's a human story. So as we wrap up our deep dive, think about what this all means. How can we, each of us and as a whole society, make a world that's both secure and caring? What can we do to support mental health and stop these kinds of things before they happen?
Those are the questions we should be asking, really thinking about, and talking about. And as we learn more about what happened here, let's remember the human beings at the center of it all and work towards a world that values both safety and compassion.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation has made you think, question things, and maybe even start some important conversations about how we can create a safer and more compassionate world for everyone.